Michael Morell is the former CIA deputy director, and he's out with a brand new book called The Great War of Our Time, the CIA's Fight Against Terrorism from Al-Qaeda to ISIS. He joins us now. Michael Morell, thank you for joining us here on the Big 550 KTRS in St. Louis.
You're welcome. Great to be with you guys.
You want to chime in on the current controversy that President Obama and the story they told about getting Osama bin Laden is fictional and not true?
What's fiction here is Seymour Hersh's article. McGraw, I was in every meeting at the CIA. I was in every meeting at the White House with regard to this. I write about this in a chapter in the book called No Mickey Mouse Operation. That was the code name for this operation. I was in the room when the president decided not to tell the Pakistanis about this. I was there when the Pakistanis were absolutely furious because of what we did, because we embarrassed them on the intelligence front, we embarrassed them on the military front. The president sent me to Pakistan to smooth over relations. So the story that Seymour Hersh is telling is simply not true. And if you want to read the truth, read the chapter in my book.
Robert Gates, the defense secretary, called it the gutsiest call he's ever seen. What do you say about the call President Obama made?
So I thought what was really gutsy about the call was to send in the special forces, right? The president could have taken the easy way out and sent a couple of B-2s and dropped 30, 40 bombs and just obliterated the place. But the gutsy call was sending in troops, putting them in harm's way to make sure you got the guy, to make sure you were able to pick up any intelligence, and to minimize the collateral damage. That was the gutsy call here.
And he did that because we needed proof. He wanted proof.
We wanted proof, and we wanted any intelligence on the ground. Absolutely right.
Yeah. Let's talk about the bad. Dick Cheney and Scooter Libby tried to bend facts to sort of connect the dots, release the name of CIA operatives. What are your thoughts?
So, you know, I have great respect for the vice president. I've dealt with a lot of senior officials over the years, and there's not too many people who are more deeply concerned about the national security of the country than the vice president. It was really his office, namely Scooter Libby, that pushed us really hard on trying to find a connection between Iraq and Al-Qaeda, and there just wasn't one. Probably the most pressure I ever felt as an analyst to come to a preordained conclusion. We pushed back. We didn't go there. We said there wasn't one, and we turned out to be right.
Yeah. What about, let's go before 9/11. Were there mistakes made before 9/11? Did we take the threat seriously enough?
So the people at CIA who were working on this took the threat very seriously. I mean, one of the things you can't forget here is that Osama bin Laden stood up publicly on several occasions, even with U.S. media outlets, and said he was going to attack us. Yes, absolutely mistakes were made. Mistakes were made by the CIA, mistakes were made by the FBI, mistakes were made by the NSA. But I think at the end of the day that 9/11 was a national failure. And, you know, one of the things I point to in the book is that President Clinton asked Vice President Gore to chair a commission on airline security. And they came up with a host of really important recommendations on enhancing the security of airlines, and the airlines fought every single one because they knew that passengers would not put up with them. And it turns out that passengers wouldn't put up with them until you had something like 9/11. So that's why I call it a national failure. There's a whole bunch of things we needed to do that weren't possible until something actually happened. It's just the nature of our society.
The book is called The Great War of Our Time, the CIA's Fight Against Terrorism from Al-Qaeda to ISIS. Our guest and author is former CIA Deputy Director Michael Morell. We go into Afghanistan, and within weeks, we win the war.
Yes.
What happened? Why did this war that we won in weeks turn into the longest war in the history of America?
Because I think two things happened. One is, you know, in those first few weeks, those first few months, we drove the Taliban from power, and we drove Al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. We drove them into Pakistan. I think two things happened. One is we wanted to make sure that the government that was put in place in Kabul would be able to maintain stability. That's a reasonable objective. But over time, the objective became to bring democracy, right, Western-style democracy to Afghanistan, to bring to bring our societal values regarding women, for example, to Afghanistan. And those are very difficult, if not impossible, objectives at the end of the day to bring to a society like that. And I think what we have to remember is that some countries are ready for democracy and some aren't. And if you try to impose democracy too soon, you often end up with instability that just feeds extremism and feeds instability and challenges our national security. And I'm not sure we've learned that lesson yet as a country.
I don't necessarily want you to weigh in. You probably won't weigh in on the current political situation, but Jeb Bush stepped in some pretty hot water, taking criticism and taking flack from both sides of the aisle after saying that if he knew now what he knew then, he would have gone into Iraq. Your thoughts as you watch this unfold all these years later?
So I have a whole chapter on this, and I don't make a judgment on whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing to do, because I think that's for historians to figure out. But what I try to do in the book is put together a picture of the context, a picture of the situation at the time that President Bush faced. And, very briefly, largest attack against America ever, 3,000 people killed. CIA and the intelligence community telling the president that Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. He is a primary enemy. We're also telling him that Saddam provides support to terrorist groups, not Al-Qaeda, but to other terrorist groups. And the president is worried that Saddam might use these weapons against us someday, or he might give these weapons to a terrorist someday. So in that context, it's not surprising what the president did. And it's not surprising in that context that most of the members of Congress at the time supported the president. So it's very important whenever you look back in history at a decision made to look at the context at the time.
But does the ultimate criticism where the administration sought the facts they wanted, not the facts that were there, to paint the picture of a more dangerous situation?
So on the question of weapons of mass destruction, that is a myth. It is a myth that the Bush administration pushed us to come to that conclusion. And all you have to remember is that we had that conclusion long before President Bush ever came to office. We believed that Saddam was pursuing those weapons during the Clinton administration. On the link between Iraq and Al-Qaeda, yeah, they pushed us, but we didn't go there. On WMD, we were already there.
How much of it was Saddam Hussein and his mad mind trying to make people think that he had all these terrible things to make himself more powerful?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. He, and I tell this story in the book, he misjudged us. What he figured is that he would stop these programs, that we, the CIA, would see it and report it, and therefore the United States would remove the sanctions. And then he would go back to these programs someday. That's what he was thinking. The other thing he was thinking was, I can't tell anybody that, and I have to be really secretive about this because I don't want the Iranians to know that I've gotten rid of these weapons because they're an important deterrent against the Iranians. So he was trying to play both sides of it. He thought the CIA was better than we turned out to be.
Former CIA Deputy Director, we could talk all day, but that's why you wrote the book, The Great War of Our Time, the CIA's Fight Against Terrorism from Al-Qaeda to ISIS. Former CIA Deputy Director Michael Morell. Michael Morell, thank you very much for your time. Good luck with the book.
Great to be with you guys.
You got it. 7:30 here, Big 550 KTRS.